So welcome. I'm Robert Tasca, Managing Director of Derivative Products for the Montreal Exchange TMX Group. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Great to be here.
And a quick introduction, Walt.
I'm Walt Lukken. I'm the CEO of the Futures Industry Association, but a 30-year member of the derivatives community, having been at the CFTC as a regulator. I'm a recovering regulator, as they would say, and there during the financial crisis. So a lot of interesting stories from those times.
Oh, great. Well, thank you once again for being part of our derivatives conference. As you know, it's a special one for us this year, celebrating 25 years of the conference and really bringing that, Canadian community and the global community together to bring attention to the Montreal Exchange and what we're looking to do in the past and how we're building for the future. So FIA being here is critical because it's an important role that you play for the global marketplace and the importance around how we shape the futures and derivative markets for the future. And I think it's been a wonderful journey so far, and there's a lot of exciting things to come. So you were, the first fireside chat today, and it was great to hear sort of your thoughts around what's going on in the industry. Do you mind me asking? How did you feel about being here in Canada and sharing your stories and sort of your thoughts around how the industry is progressing and what's to come?
Well, it's exciting to be up here, and you can sort of feel it in the air. Because it's the 25th anniversary of the conference, but so many interesting things are happening at TMX, and you're a part of those things. But the innovation that's happening around interest rate products, the credit products just launched, the growth that you're seeing. A lot of buzz around, innovation happening in our markets around 24/7 trading, perpetuals, prediction markets. But as I mentioned in my fireside chat, the traditional markets are where the action is occurring, and Canada plays a tremendously important role, distinct from the U.S. liquidity pool. And I think you're going to see lots of growth and attention on the Canadian markets in the years to come.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned those. And when I was listening to the fireside chat, just in terms of that balance between that traditional market, which we call traditional, but it's not that old when you think
Right.
about it in terms of the futures market and the derivatives market. But now there's a lot of product innovation. It's something that we're constantly looking at and speaking to customers in terms of what solutions, what products we could bring to market. And you highlighted that just sort of that creativity that the futures market could bring, because we could create products as long as they meet the maximum amount of participants to build sort of that liquidity, but having that core central clearing counterparty and margin process that is critical. How has that evolved, and what are some of your members kind of thinking about when we talk about that infrastructure and those sort of now traditional markets? Are there anything that needs to be further investigated, looked into to make sure that we stay at the forefront of providing these solutions?
Well, I think, and I mentioned this a bit, and I heard it on the last panel as well, but really focused on risk is important. We got to create this environment that allows that innovation to occur. But importantly, it has to be responsible innovation. I think we have to make sure that the markets are functioning, that we're doing everything in our powers to avoid manipulation and fraud in our markets, and that the integrity of the system is through the clearing process, through all the controls that your exchange has and has been a leader on. Those things are incredibly important. So if you can build those parameters, that steady state, that ecosystem, then allow the responsible innovation to occur. And to me, that's the trade-off is making sure that we're not, innovating at any cost, because then you'll have disasters. You'll have the Enrons, the FTXs, the Lehman Brothers. We have to do this responsibly, and I think TMX is leading the way on that.
Well, we appreciate that comment. And I mean, for us, and you see it here at the conference, we have a diverse participant base that comes here, and they for the simple reason that they're not just focused on the clearing side. We have the regulatory and compliance teams that come to the conference to hear what's going on. We have a buy side community that wants to hear about new trends and products and how can they further add these products into their portfolios, and of course the banks and the broker dealers. So it's a nice community that comes together every year. And what's important with the FIA and how that ties into TMX is that a lot of our customers say, you're a trusted marketplace.
Right.
And so if TMX and the Montreal Exchange, puts a product forth, makes some changes to the clearing infrastructure, rule changes for best practices, and make sure that we're a trusted marketplace, that's why they come here. So sometimes we feel like, oh, we need to move a little bit faster to bring products to market and make some changes. But at the same time, I think we also need to recognize that our stakeholders trust our process and trust that if we're bringing something to market is because it was well thought out, and we're deemed systemically important to the Bank of Canada. So we take these things very seriously, and we anticipate and we hope that that continues for the future, because more products could come to market. Like you mentioned, we could innovate around credit and bringing transparency into credit markets, but again, done in a way that is community focused under the sort of regulatory framework, and make sure we have the right clearing processes in place. Is there anything that you see that potentially could disrupt that, or do you feel like these are marketplaces and an infrastructure that's going to really stand the test of time for the future?
I think you hit the nail on the head. You talk about trust. Trust is so important in markets, and it can be easily lost in markets too. And it takes a long time to build that back. I think the wonderful thing about this conference is it brings the community together to try to talk about the challenges ahead. But it's, making sure that, like you said, that the system works, and you allow this innovation to occur. Oftentimes, and we're seeing this, even in the United States, there is a race to the bottom, and we want to make sure that regulations are not the least regulations. We don't want the most prescriptive regulations. We want the right regulations. I think Canada's done a nice job at that. Sometimes maybe people may get frustrated that it's not moving fast enough, but that trust is so important. I think even after the financial crisis, when the U.S. banks, were devastated, a lot of the Canadian banks did very well because they were the steady, trusted, doing things the right way. And so I think that's really important part of the culture, what is attracting investors here, traders here. You have to have those trade-offs of how can we innovate responsibly, but maintain that trust. And that's always a constant tension, Rob, that I'm sure you feel all the time. But you do it on both sides, both on the product side, but even on the regulatory side, position limit reforms, other things that you all are doing. So to me, that is the sweet spot that really can distinguish Canada from the rest of the world. And I think you guys are helping to lead the way.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I appreciate the nice comments. And, I guess, coming from the FIA and seeing sort of the global marketplace, you're involved in so many jurisdictions. You've expanded the association, across various countries and geographies. For us, the global participation is incredibly important for us in bringing sort of global assets into the Canadian market. It's important for debt issuance and the likes. And we're going to talk about it quite a bit around tri-party repo and clearing of repo here in Canada and expanding sort of those mandates. But that global participation is extremely important, and that making sure there's a frictionless sort of market structure so that we could continuously attract that global liquidity. And like you said, make sure that, Canada is an investable marketplace. And I think we've achieved that through a lot of our fixed income and equity derivatives. Is there any insight that you could provide us in terms of, that global nature, the 24/7 you spoke about, the derivatives markets and us included, were near 24 hours a day, 5 days a week, and sort of bringing the market accessible to many participants? Are there any other sort of global phenomenons, either in the regulatory reform or from, product innovation that you see occurring in the industry?
You are seeing trends around the world that are consistent. It's not just happening in the US, happening in Europe, happening in Canada, happening in Asia. 24/7 is, especially around the crypto space, is driving that conversation. And you saw on the last panel with some of the buy side, if we can add that feature to the marketplace with the right liquidity, with the right controls, that would be an important part of giving more access to our markets. That's not a tomorrow problem. Hopefully we are systematic on the way that we open up those markets and we do it correctly, responsibly, get back to that word. So that to me is a trend that's happening. I do think, whereas the United States is in a bit of a deregulatory sense, Europe is right now, and we'll be in London, FIA's event, its flagship European event, IDX is next week, has a real competitiveness problem. They're losing productivity, they're losing market share to the rest of the world. Because they have too prescriptive regulations, too prescriptive in government oversight. And so they're trying to figure out that balance. That's where, Canada can be a bit of the Goldilocks, where you have Europe, which is, all we talk about are regulations and the rules there. In the United States, where maybe things are moving too fast, I think Canada has a way to distinguish itself as, like in Goldilocks, this is just right, and so to me, there's a real opportunity there. What FIA tries to do, and I'm glad to hear your comments about what you find valuable about FIA, is to bring the peers together, and you can sort of have some faith in the herd that if I'm doing things the correct way, what are the best practices, am I, on par with my brethren? That's great. It could be that you're doing things better than they are. That's great too. What we try to do is when we see our members that may not have all the necessary controls and practices in place, when we bring them together, we can help to raise the level of those standards. And that's a big part of what we do, is just making sure the ecosystem is on par with where it should be. So I'm glad TMX is getting value from us. And we try to learn everywhere we go about how we can better the industry going forward. So thank you for being a part of FIA.
Well, Walt, we really appreciate that you joined us for the 25th anniversary. It's a great pleasure, and we're going to continue working together. And thank you again for coming out to Quebec City.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Rob,
it.
and hope for 25 more.
I hope so too. Thank you.